Right, so my channel has actually been panned in the past before by trying to take other pieces of media and translating them into systems like your local TTRPG or, of course, Dungeons & Dragons. And I've always found that kind of really funny. Like, people would get upset because I would make videos like how to translate this video game encounter into your session, like sans Undertale. Or how would you use these things to learn to make better encounters for your games? Like, we all get inspiration from somewhere. The human mind is very good at developing on existing ideas. So why would you get upset at doing that? The reason I'm bringing it up is because today I want to talk about the newest sensation to sweep the nation and the world, if you were to believe Steam statistics, Baldurs Gate 3. Now, I will be honest, initially I had a very bad experience with this game for one specific reason. I played it back when it was in early release. It was buggy, it was difficult to play, the UI was terrible, the game crashed every couple of minutes, and frankly, I just wanted my $60 back. That being said, the game is officially out now, and I have played quite a bit of it. So what is it that I think? Well, I love it. Don't get me wrong, the game is still somewhat buggy and is a huge hog for your computer. I even tried to play it on stream, and well... nudity! A whole series of events happened that eventually led me to being forcefully made into a VTuber on stream in front of a live audience by an AI, and yes, as my wife said, there was quite a bit of nudity. Does that make any sense? No, probably not, but trust me, it will make sense if you go to my second channel, where I actually have made a video detailing the events that happened here, and you can watch it and see me go insane live.
Gain advantage on intimidation and performance. Spectral hand that can manipulate objects. Put your clothes back! I don't even have, I don't even have nudity enabled!
But the point is, I have been loving Baldur's Gate, and I've been playing it with my wife and having an absolutely fantastic time. And what's so funny is the more that I go through this game, the more that I realize it is an amazing way of teaching tempo in a D&D game. Now, tempo is not something I've actually talked about a whole ton on my channel before. Most of the time what I talk about is, well, honestly, game design and mechanics, or how to translate those mechanics into meaningful storytelling beats. But when it comes to tempo, that is a very specific thing that is really difficult to do, and so I've avoided talking about it. See, tempo is the ability to keep a consistent flow in your sessions, to create a cohesive story that fits together, and to keep the momentum going so that your players are always engaged, and by the time you reach the end of the session for the day, everybody feels satisfied. What it means is, for the most part, people felt like they had the chance to do everything they wanted to do that session. You know, you had the chance to talk to people, you had the chance to have a fun combat, you had the chance to explore. The system just worked. And let's be honest, that is a very difficult thing to do, especially if you're trying to follow the rules that are in the gameplay books for D&D 5e specifically. Well, they try to give you information on how many encounters you should have per day in your sessions, but the truth is that it's going to be something that will be determined by every single table, not just a universal number. Like, for example, my table has a lot more players than most have, and because of that, I cannot put as many encounters in each session as, well, frankly, anything I'd like to. Honestly, by the time we get to all the sessions that the books recommend, we'd be exhausted. More than 1 or 2 combat encounters in a session takes up the entire session because of how many players I have at the table and how long it will take to go through each of their turns. So how do you fix this? Enter Baldur's Gate. See, Baldur's Gate is incredible because it shows what the tempo of your session should look like. It gives a very over-the-head view of what events in D&D look like to player characters and how to balance that. Because, see, it handles all of the dice rolling. In fact, it handles everything that happens in the background to the player characters. It looks like a very cohesive story with seamless integration without any difficulty with any of the mechanics. Me and my wife, in one single play session, have been sitting down to play about 2 or 3 hours at a time. We can go through multiple combat encounters, 4 or 5 of them sometimes if we're really screwing things up. We can go through an incredible amount of social encounters. We can spend the entire time exploring everything, and by the end of it all, we don't feel like anything was dragging on because we had the chance to move forward, and the game handled the mechanics for us. I do need to pause, however, because I wrote the script before we played today. In fact, we were playing just like, well, like an hour or 2 ago, and no, I did not suck, but I did unfortunately assume the game would give me a decision it didn't, and we did have to reload a save and go through like 3 more combat encounters. So today we went through, no joke, like 9 or 10 combat encounters.
I've never had to make us redo a save.
You are a liar and the truth is not within you. Now, obviously, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are screaming at me through the screen right now. You're saying, yeah, but we don't have something that handles the mechanics for us, so you can't compare them. It's like oranges to apples. And yeah, you'd be correct. I will admit there's going to be a massive difference when there is a computer doing all of the math for it. See, in Baldur's Gate, I can walk up to a strange sarcophagus, and in the process of me doing so, the game's going to do a lot of stuff for me in the background. It will go ahead and roll a religion check for me, and let me know if I succeeded or failed without ever stopping me from moving forward. It will then tell me, based on that religion check, what information I got, simply by having the character say things out loud, or the narrator will explain to me what I've learned in the background. Then, as I approach the sarcophagus itself, it will roll a perception check for me. Based on the failure or success, it will let me know if I see the trap that is surrounding the sarcophagus. If I failed, I don't know there's a trap. Well, I can assume, but I don't get to see it. Then, at that point, I have the opportunity to try and disable the trap, at which point it will have me roll, because that's a more important moment. And then I have the opportunity to choose to open the sarcophagus should I decide to. If you're to do the same thing in a game of D&D at your table, you're going to start by approaching, and your DM is going to ask you to go ahead and make a religion check. Then, based on that roll, they're going to tell you the information your character has about this. Then as you approach it more, the DM will stop you and asks you, more than likely, unless you are a very kind DM, but most people don't have that, if you would like to search for traps. And it will not be an automatic roll, because obviously you can't have automatic rolls for these sort of things at a table. A computer's not doing it for you. So you go ahead, you investigate the traps, you find the trap, you then have to roll to disable the trap, and then you may choose to push the sarcophagus. What takes merely 10 seconds in Baldur's Gate could take up to 5 or 6 minutes in D&D, and that is difficult to handle. So of course, all of this then leads to the question, what can we learn about Baldur's to improve the tempo of our games? Because what I'm not saying is that it's better to play Baldur's than to play D&D. See, the more I play the game, I honestly see how simple rolling should be. Many times when we are rolling, the most important part of D&D is the dice. And yes, of course we would feel that way, because the dice kind of dictate everything. But many times we make a big deal about all of our rolls when we could simply just make it simpler. One thing that I've noticed, and this probably won't affect every table, but I think for a certain few tables this will be a very helpful piece of advice, is that when dice is rolled in Baldur's, the game already knows and tells you the DC. Therefore, there is no need for communication about the necessary roll to the player. All you need to know is the number the dice roll. A player can tell me something simple. They could say, I would like to approach the sarcophagus. And I would say, you actually might know something about this. Go ahead and roll a religion check for me. The DC for this is going to be 12. Now, while they're rolling and adding up the numbers, I can focus on another player real quick and do something entirely different. I don't have to worry about telling the player if they succeeded or failed. The player could simply then look at me, roll a religion check, and tell me, hey, I made it, or I didn't make it. Additionally, having these DCs in the open also makes the players feel more confident in what their characters are capable of doing. Because if you're letting them know that the DCs ahead of time are 12, 13, 14, or 15, they know on average how well their characters are going to do with certain types of checks. And it also adds an incredible amount of importance when the DC is a different number than one might expect. If the DC is suddenly higher than what they've been experiencing previously, suddenly we know that that is probably something of story significance, something more important. If they've been expecting DCs of 10 or 15 and suddenly I say, oh, this one is a 17, they know that this one may be something that needs to be focused on more. It has something that is more high stakes or is dangerous. But beyond that, that's only one thing you can do to continue to increase the tempo of your game. Another thing you could do is just in general know the strengths of your player characters. And honestly, I'm willing to bet most DMs do this without even truly realizing. A lot of the times we begin to get a sense for what our player characters are good at. It's just naturally how the game goes. You have them roll, you know what roles are going to do well at. If I have somebody who has a very wizened wizard who seems to know a lot about history, I'm eventually going to learn the proficiency they have in history, because it's going to be the same number. I don't even need to have their character sheet in front of me at that point. I know generally that their character is proficient in history and what that number should be at this level. And so I could take the average of their rolls, the passive history score, which if you don't know, in order to calculate a passive score, it's just 10 plus the proficiency modifier and the actual modifier of the character. And then I know what rolls they would have to make. And so with this knowledge, I could go, yeah, I have a DC of 12, but they already have a massive modifier to this. They have a +9. There's no point in having them roll. Their average is 19. And I could just give them the information for free. So basically what I'm trying to say is that because Baldurs handles stuff in the background, it teaches us that in order to keep the tempo of our game at a decent pace and moving forward, we should just simply not have to drag things out. We should let people know numbers ahead of time and keep things simpler. A lot of the times Baldurs will often have us roll for the most ridiculous of things and give us a very short sentence. In D&D, we don't even have to have them roll for it. We can just give them the information for free and keep the game moving forward because it wasn't important to roll the dice. I don't know about you guys, but I oftentimes fall into this trap of making everything in my games too important. Which sounds weird, but hear me out. Yes, this does add some amount of allure to the game, but it also bogs it down. If I make every roll very important, well, what does that do to the game? If every roll is going to make a reveal of some new incredible information, suddenly everything begins to feel dull, and I'm just going to give them more and more info, and they're not going to be able to dig through it to know what is actually truly important to focus on. If we slow things down and simplify them, then they know what's important. They know when I'm focusing on something and they can follow my focus onto the spotlight. But there's that, and then there are other things that Baldurs does that honestly does an incredible job of keeping the game moving forward, such as their combat. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's unfair to try and compare our D&D combat to Baldurs combat. The video game is simply way better at moving the combat forward because, well, frankly, it can automate most things. It automates attack rolls, ability checks, saving throws, and you don't have to get bogged down with that all. Now that being said, I will say that it is much better in D&D specifically at your table of preventing your wife from accidentally lighting everything on fire, because somehow that does happen every combat. It doesn't matter which combat it is, it doesn't matter what's happening, she will light your party on fire. And at least in D&D, I get to look at her before she makes that roll and go, are you sure you want to do that? And they get lit on fire anyways.
I just want you to know it wasn't me last time. It was the goblins that lit us on fire. It was my grease spell that caused it from the beginning. But you said it was a good idea.
No, you did do well that time. What about the previous times?
I don't know what you're talking.
You know what? Actually, let's just do this. How many times have you lit our party on fire?
Like maybe 100.
Maybe 100. I need a drink.
At least I'm not like this one girl who didn't understand that you weren't supposed to kiss the mind flayer at the beginning, and then she kissed him and died and didn't save prior, so she didn't have her save at all.
Huh? So, when it comes to learning what to do best in combat, I will not lie. Actually maintaining the tempo of the game isn't so easy if you're trying to learn from Baldurs. However, there is something else that you can do. See, Baldurs has something that I think is a weakness for a lot of DMs if they are not using pre-made modules, and that is battles with interactable environments, such as aforementioned ignitable grease traps. I cannot tell you how many times I've simply chosen to forego an attack action or casting a spell simply because I saw how much on the battlefield could honestly be interacted with. There is always 2, 3, if not more things that can interact with on the battlefield that are going to be interesting and far more interesting than a simple attack action. Whether it is a bunch of goblins that are attempting to attack you and you realize one of them is going to try and call for help by banging on the nearby drums, so you must destroy that drum before the goblin gets to it, whether there is an explosive barrel on the floor, or whether it's, again, a grease trap which you could catch fire and harm a lot of people, including your own party. There's almost always something to interact with in every combat encounter. And many times, I think we figure out the monster's abilities, we figure out the monster's special moves, but the core part of any combat encounter is removed because we don't add anything to the environment. Honestly, there are 3 forces in every combat encounter. There are the player characters, there's the monsters or the enemies, and then there's the environment. And the environment typically doesn't get added onto as much as it truly should have. The environment allows you to change every combat. What could just simply be a simple group of wargs suddenly becomes an incredibly interesting effect if you add different layers, different explosions, different things that the players can interact with. And those players which don't have the ability to use their core abilities, such as a fighter who simply can't get to the enemies, has things to interact with in combat that still make them feel important. And it allows the enemies to have something to interact with so that they could be more of a threat even if their CR says they shouldn't. Honestly, I'm having a blast playing Baldur's, and the things that it teaches about D&D are very basic, but when you see it in this format, somehow it just makes the game feel more wide open and incredible. It's so fun to play, and I feel like I'm learning more about D&D from it every single day, whether it's combat encounter ideas, whether it's ability to roleplay better simply by watching the NPCs, or just, you know, watching the stupid shenanigans that we get up to and inevitably end up trying to get ourselves killed. And I realize that I am maybe not any better than my players, but I'm not ashamed of that fact. I think it's an amazing game, and it's an amazing way of helping learn more about the game which we all love, which is D&D. Is it a replacement for the TTRPG? No. No, it's not, and it never will be. But it is an amazing supplement to learn from, and I think, honestly, it's just a whole bunch of fun. Before I end the video, anything to add?
I'm better at Baldur's than you are.